Thank you, and just share my screen. So thank you everyone for having me today. My name is Melissa Siegel, and I'm a registered dietitian at the Grand River Community Health Center. And today's presentation is on soft food diet. So today we'll be talking about why we might follow a soft food diet, what is a soft food diet, and some recipe and meal ideas as well as some extra resources. So there's a variety of reasons why someone might follow a soft food diet. They might have difficulty with chewing. So maybe they've had some dental surgery, maybe they don't have dentures that fit well. They might have mouth sores. There can be a variety of reasons. They might have difficulty with swallowing. They might get tired when eating. And they might feel that they have some weak jaw muscles. So some of these things you might get kind of diagnosed with or have a medical professional help you with. And other times you might just feel like I might need to change the texture of my diet. A word that comes up when you start discussing texture and changing the texture of a diet is dysphagia. And dysphagia is defined as objective impairment or difficulty in swallowing, resulting in an abnormal delay in the transit of a liquid or solid bolus. And bolus just means the piece of food going down. So dysphagia refers more to swallowing, but we have to remember that digestion starts in the mouth. So chewing is the mechanical breakdown of food. And we also have an enzyme called amylase that's in our saliva that helps break down our food, called carbohydrates. And so chewing is really important for mixing and breaking down our food. If you think that you might be having problems with chewing or swallowing, you might require getting a swallowing assessment. You might require a change in your diet texture or a change in your eating techniques. And a swallowing assessment is usually something you would go to your doctor about and get a referral to a speech language pathologist or an SLP. And they can help you determine what kind of texture diet would be right for you. Sometimes you might come across a dietitian who is trained in swallowing assessments or other healthcare providers who are trained in swallowing assessments. And that would be more likely if it was maybe in a hospital or long-term care. And this isn't exactly necessary for you to know, but this is kind of where our information is coming from today about what is a soft food diet. And several years ago now, but it's still in the process, the IDDSI, or International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative, was kind of formed. And it's a framework to standardize the terminology of textured diets worldwide and to help guide kind of what the levels of food textures are. So in the past, if you said soft food diet, it might be different what foods would be allowed if you were in the hospital and you were put on a soft food diet, and then maybe you're sent home and told to be on a soft food diet, or you'd go to a long-term care home and be on a soft food diet. They might have different foods that they are kind of allowing on that diet. So this framework, in hopes of kind of regulating it all, so everyone's talking the same language. And when we talk about a soft food diet, the areas we focus on are kind of the regular and easy to chew foods. So those are probably the foods that come to your mind first when you think about a soft food diet. And then we have soft and bite-sized. So that also kind of goes in that soft food diet, and they're just a little different, and we'll discuss that today. So these are the areas we're thinking about. After this, you could get to minced or pureed or a liquid diet. So when most people think of a regular, a soft food diet, it's this regular, easy to chew foods. So we know this diet might be right for us if we have the ability to chew and break down soft, tender foods without help. There's no swallowing or choking risk. We don't tire with eating, and we can bite off a bite-sized piece of food and be able to manage it in our mouth for safe swallowing on our own. So I'd invite you to, even if you feel you don't need a soft food diet, but to take a piece of food if you have it now or later on when you're eating, and just pay attention to all the work your mouth does to get food from being in that solid form in your hand and then soft enough to swallow. There's a lot of things going on. So we have to be able to do all of that for this diet. The soft food diet, easy to chew foods, really does include everyday foods that are a soft and tender texture. So you might not actually have to change your diet all that much. It might just require making some modifications. We can also eat these foods with a fork or a spoon or fingers or chopsticks. It's solid, you can pick it up. Opposed to if you were thinking of a pureed diet, you would really only be able to use a spoon. There's no restriction on food pieces with this, and your tongue should be able to apply pressure to soften and moisten the food before swallowing. So one way to know if your food is soft can be if you put a piece of the food in your mouth and you press your tongue to the roof of your mouth and it squishes. That could be an indication that it's a good soft food. It also should be able to pass the fork test. And this is a test that gets done on foods, if in the hospital or industry, whether they're making soft foods. So you should be able to cut the food with a fork. And if you press the tines of the fork on the food with enough pressure to see the white of your finger, so your fingernail blanches, you'll press down and the food should stay in that pressed shape. It shouldn't spring back up. So that's also how you can tell if the food is soft enough. So foods that can be included on this diet. Oftentimes when people have difficulty with chewing, let's say their dentures don't fit properly, or maybe they don't wear any dentures, they're missing teeth, or they have any mouth pain, I tend to find that the protein foods get put to the side first because we think, oh, I can't eat steak. That's too tough. So we need to think about what foods that are protein-rich foods can we still include in our diet. So we want these foods to be cooked to tender, and this might mean using wet cooking methods. So things like the crock pot or boiling or stewing. If you're baking something in the oven, we'd want to have a lot of liquid with it. We might also add gravies and sauces or butter or margarine to our foods to help moisten them. So examples of foods that are already naturally like this, you might include in your diet already, would be fish. So cooked fish or canned fish. Things like stews and soups with the pieces cooked tender. So if we had bits of carrot or tiny pieces of celery in there, they would be cooked to be soft. Things like lentils and beans can also be good protein sources that are nice and soft. Especially lentils, they have the smaller skins, so there's not a risk of choking if you don't really break it down well. We also have things that are soft like tofu. So this picture shows the outside being quite crispy, but we might not want to get that crispy coating on the outside if we're having difficulty chewing. But tofu is a nice soft protein food. A lot of people think, you know, I can't eat red meats because pork chops and steaks, they are stringy, they are tough. So we might look to use more ground meats, ground chicken. Something like a meatloaf might be an idea. And we would want to make sure it's nice and moist, maybe put sauces on it. We'd also want to avoid the crusty parts. So sometimes people like the crusty edges. But you think of a meatloaf maybe versus a hamburger patty, where the hamburger patty, the outside gets all crusty. That might be too hard to chew. So we want to keep the meat nice and moist and soft. We can also eat things like eggs. Pretty much any eggs are nice and soft. So they go well for protein sources. And then we have dairy products as well. So yogurts, puddings made with milk, cottage cheese, even hard cheeses can be okay for some people. And we might think about making things like smoothies where we put milk in them and yogurt in them, and then maybe blend up harder to chew foods. For our fruits and vegetables, we want them to be soft enough to break apart with a fork. An example might be, we have that picture of peaches there. So it's peach season. Sometimes you get those unripe peaches that are hard like an apple. That's not going to fit on a soft food diet, but maybe a really juicy peach would fit. Or we can think about using canned fruit if we're kind of uncertain. So canned peaches, canned pears, those tend to work well. Bananas, of course. We also might think about steaming and boiling our vegetables until they're soft. So on a soft food diet, don't tend to do well with salads and hard raw vegetables. We want to cook them. Raw and root vegetables tend to cook well to be soft. We want to avoid the fibrous parts in the skins. So think of the membrane on orange sections. That is kind of hard to break down if we're having trouble with chewing. So we might want to avoid that part. Or the skin on apples. So we might peel our apples instead of just, you know, biting into them. And also with apples, we might decide to change the texture, right? So we might cook our apple slices so we can still enjoy apples just in a little bit different way. And we want to be mindful of when we eat juicy fruits where the pulp and the juice separate. So this can be more, I would say, if we think we might have a risk of choking. The fruit I would say to think about is watermelon. So when you chew on it or mush it down, all that juice comes out. But if you have trouble with chewing the pulp of the watermelon, you can end up with a pretty big piece that might just slip down. So we want to kind of just be mindful of those types of fruits and vegetables. For grain products, most are acceptable if well cooked. So we might not do al dente, we might just cook it a bit softer. Cereal, be mindful again of that separating of liquids and the solid pieces. So you might want to kind of drain your cereal from the milk and eat them separately. We could avoid crunchy cereals and of course ones with hard pieces like nuts and dried fruit. For rice, there's no restrictions. We tend to do pretty well with rice, but again, something like wild rice might be harder to chew than white rice. And with bread, it's a bit of a tricky one because it's really individual. So bread, of course, is nice and soft, but maybe if you think of an Italian bread bun where it has the hard outside, that might not be so soft, right? So it's really individual to kind of what your difficulty with chewing is and if there's any swallowing concern. So you might have this white bread, you know, regular sandwich bread here, and maybe you cut off the crust. So I hope that shows you, like, there are a lot of foods you can eat on a soft food diet without really needing to avoid too much. But there are some foods to just be a little mindful of. So stringy and fibrous textures like pineapple, big pieces of celery, green beans with the strings on them, and lettuce can be hard to chew and break down. Vegetable and fruit skins, like we talked about, so even grape skins or apple skins can be difficult. For grain products, some people have difficulty with toast. It doesn't dissolve in the mouth as easily, and it is kind of sharp if it's cooked quite well. So we might decide to lather on a lot of butter and jam to moisten it up. Again, everyone's different. Potato chips, you know, they tend to be kind of sharp and they don't dissolve well in the mouth, so we might avoid those. We might also have problems with flaky pastries. So if you think of a Danish with a layer of pastry, they're nice and soft, but if we have problems with chewing, they're actually kind of chewy, so they might not break down that well. Dry, crumbly biscuits may be a problem, like crackers, even bread products that are really crumbly, muffins that are crumbly. So again, we might just think, how can we moisten this with some butter or jam, something like that. And bread crust we've talked about. Of course, we want to avoid hard foods like candies, nuts, and seeds. And then sometimes with the husks, so corn kernels, think of the little husk, that's kind of hard to break down if we're not able to chew it up. And grainy breads with the little bits in it might be difficult. So that's the easy to chew foods, the kind of what we usually think of on a soft food diet. The next level would be soft and bite-sized. So this would be if there is some swallowing difficulties. This texture is used if there's a risk of choking with swallowing. So the rule of thumb is kind of follow the easy to chew diet, but we're going to adjust the size of the food. So we're not going to rely on our bites. We're going to try and make them about 1.5 centimeters by 1.5 centimeters, which is about the size of a dice. So, or maybe a small thumbnail, right? So that's what we might cut our food up. That way, if it goes down, there's not that risk. No regular dry bread is suggested for this diet. And we might think about just modifying our sandwiches to make them easier to swallow. There's a link there for a YouTube video that you can follow to watch, you know, how to make a minced sandwich if you felt you needed to adjust bread texture. Rice does require sauce to moisten it and hold it together. It shouldn't be sticky or gluey, and the individual grains shouldn't separate from each other. So we want to think about putting sauces that kind of hold it together. There could be a few more restrictions on this diet, or just things to be mindful of. So we might want to avoid mixed textures, so soup with pieces of food in it. And the reason for this is sometimes the liquid goes down first and then the solid pieces try and follow after, and then that's when they get caught in our throat. So we might do more pureed soups. And again, with the cereal and milk, draining the cereal from the milk. We might want to avoid still hard, dry foods, nuts, raw vegetables, maybe crackers, breads, if they're hard to eat. Tough and fibrous foods like steak and pineapple don't tend to be easy to chew. Crispy foods like crisp bacon and popcorn, again, hard bits to break down. Sharp foods like corn chips and potato chips. And pips and seeds, and also like the pith of the orange we talked about, but whole nuts and seeds we want to avoid. Foods with the skins and shells, so things like even green peas, that little shell on it, grapes, sausage skin, chicken skin, might want to avoid those things. Avoid husks on the corn kernels or shredded wheat and bran. So if you think of like a Weetabix square, right? That wheat doesn't, you have to use your teeth to break it down sometimes, or you want to make it very soft. So let it sit in some milk or hot water for a bit of time. We want to avoid fish bones and meat gristle. We'll want to avoid sticky and gummy foods. Some people might have problems with peanut butter, especially if mixed on soft, like white bread. We want to avoid sticky rice cakes and sometimes edible gelatin. Overcooked oatmeal can also be a problem. Stringy foods like string beans and rhubarb. So again, all of this depends on kind of the size of the piece. You know, is it the size of that dice? Is it cooked really well? We might be able to mash it down to swallow it without risk. It's just really depends on the individual. Floppy foods like lettuce, cucumbers, uncooked spinach, so kind of avoiding the salads. We might want to watch crust form during cooking, like if you get cheese on the top of your shepherd's pie that crisps up, we might want to avoid that, or the crust on the mashed potatoes, crust on meat that we talked about. Watching those juicy foods where the pulp and the liquid separate, like in watermelon or cantaloupe, orange slices. Large or hard lumps and pieces of vegetables. So casseroles can be a really great food item on a soft food diet. Pasta and you can put your protein, your meat in there, your vegetables in there. You just want to make sure everything's cut up small. So just keeping all of this in mind, an example menu on a soft food diet might be breakfast, could be cooked hot cereal and yogurt. Lunch could be mini crustless quiche, which we'll talk about later, and a slice of whole wheat bread with butter on it. Dinner could be fish or chicken and cooked vegetables with boiled sweet potatoes. And snacks can be pudding or yogurt or canned fruit or an ensure. But you don't necessarily need to use those nutritional supplements because you can get a lot of your diet from everyday foods. Now, this menu plan might be good for somebody if the reason for you needing a soft food diet is kind of short term. You don't mind kind of sticking to the same foods over and over again. But if it's a long-term thing, you might need to think a little bit more about, okay, how am I going to add variety to my diet beyond just kind of the already soft foods? So some meal ideas, thinking about, you know, instead of eating that piece of barbecue chicken, maybe making chicken a la king. It's got lots of sauce and vegetables in it. Shepherd's pie, meatloaf. If you're craving a hamburger, but you need it soft, maybe a Salisbury steak with gravy, homemade mac and cheese. Any kind of stewed meat dishes tend to be okay. And quiche, also any kind of egg dishes tend to be okay. Again, we don't need to change our meals too much, but some meal supports in our community do offer meals that are in different textures. Soft food, again, tends to be just pick foods that kind of fit that soft food diet. But if you needed minced or pureed or thickened fluid meals, Heart to Home Meals does offer different options. And you can just Google hearttohomemeals.ca and come up with their contact. Meals on Wheels might do some modified texture meals as well, but I'd suggest contacting them to ask. And a lot of the reasons I see people out in the community who are requesting soft food meals is because of their teeth. So just a reminder that dental programs, there's the Ontario Dental Seniors Care Program. And again, you can Google that, Ontario Dental Seniors Care Program, and get the details. It is for 65 and up. There are income requirements. You have to have no other form of dental benefits, and you can apply online or by mail. And if your healthcare provider is at Grand River Community Health Center and you meet certain criteria, you can meet with our social prescriber to find out about our SMILE program. And it kind of helps to make up a payment plan for dental work. But for that one, you have to be a member of, like, have your primary care at Grand River Community Health Center. I'm going to stop sharing now. And I'm going to hope that you all can see me. So welcome to the Grand River Community Health Center kitchen. And I just wanted to take some time to talk about, again, some of those longer term changes to our meals. So sometimes, you know, we're okay with doing some yogurt and pudding for a little while and lentil soup maybe, but then we get a little bored. So we need to think about how could I modify things long term. And one suggestion I would say to have on hand is a little food processor, or even probably something like a small blender or magic bullet type thing might work okay. But a food processor won't quite puree it. So, you know, for example here, you know, you might be fine with some tuna sandwiches and egg salad for a while, but then, oh, you know, I want a meat sandwich, a roast beef sandwich, or a ham sandwich. So all I did was take some sliced ham and put it in the food processor and kind of cut it up into little bits. And then we just make kind of like a ham salad instead of a tuna salad sandwich. So as you could probably see there, these pieces are pretty dry and crumbly. If you just put that on white bread, that might be difficult for eating. So you can just add some mayonnaise if you like that, or oil, something for some moisture. I'm going to put some mustard with it. And then you'd want to have it on top of bread that is moistened well. Yeah, and then we just, you're right, see, now it's a little bit clumpier and it holds together better. And that definitely fits in a soft food diet so that you can enjoy more variety. The other thing I would like to talk about a little bit, it's just, you might have to think of how can you modify recipes, right? So I said I'd share the mini quiche recipe with you. So the recipe I have is for crustless mini vegetable quiche. So we might think of the quiche, it has that flaky pastry, but maybe if we're having problems with chewing, we might want to not have that crust. That might be difficult for us. So this recipe can be made in a large pan or muffin tins, so it makes it into individual portions. And what you do, it's kind of like making scrambled eggs. So this recipe uses 10 eggs in order to make 12 mini quiches. It uses a 1/4 cup of milk, a 1/2 teaspoon of dry mustard, a 1/2 teaspoon of Italian seasoning, and a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. But if you like your eggs plain, you don't have to add in the seasonings, or you can change up your seasonings. So again, like 10 eggs and a 1/4 cup of milk plus seasonings. This recipe called for 1/2 cup of finely chopped green peppers, a 1/2 cup of finely chopped tomatoes, and a 1/2 cup of finely chopped onions. So all these vegetables could be okay on a soft food diet, but in this recipe, they ask you to just cut up the vegetables and add them raw to the eggs. Well, that might be hard on a soft food diet. So you might think, okay, I have to saute my vegetables first to soften them up. Or you could think what I did here was, what are some other vegetables that are softer than, let's say, they don't have that peel of the pepper? I used broccoli. So I just heated up some frozen broccoli and cut it into small pieces. And that's going to be a lot easier to chew. So you might think about just how can I modify foods and meals that I already enjoy. And then it used 3/4 cup of grated cheddar cheese. So cheese, of course, fits on a soft food diet. You just mix all your ingredients together in a bowl and spoon them into muffin cups and cook it for 20 minutes at 350. And you're ready to go. And these actually work quite well because they freeze really well. So you have your little individual portions, and then you can put them when they're cooled down in a Ziploc bag or a container and put them in the freezer. And you can take them out, defrost them for 10 seconds in the microwave, and you're ready to go. So it's just one of those meal ideas as well that doesn't make us rely on, let's say, canned soup, right? If we're thinking I need a soft food diet, and canned soups are fine, but they can have a lot of salt. Maybe we're worried about that. So something like this idea for a meal can help add variety.
Melissa, excuse me, just 2-minute warning for wrap up.
Thank you. So that's all. That is perfect, because that's all I have to say about the soft food diet. I'm just going to add one extra thing, is that the Grand River Community Health Center is back in swing with all our fall programming. So if you'd like to visit our center and pick up a calendar, or whenever you see this video, there's always going to be a calendar available at the center to see what groups we have going on. And I definitely hope to see you in some of our cooking classes in the community kitchen. So thank you today.
Thank you very much.